But first, on Tuesday, the Idaho House voted down a bill that would have revised safety requirements for daycare facilities. Some of those updates that this legislation would have required is that children be in safety restraints if driven by the daycare, require infants under the age of 12 months to be placed on their backs when they sleep, and to increase the number of training hours required for all employees annually from 4 to 12. That bill, though, it failed 23 to 44, with opponents arguing that those new regulations would be onerous. Betsy Russell sat down with the sponsor of that bill, Representative Ilana Rubel, to get her thoughts on the bill and her new role as minority leader.
Thanks for joining us. Representative Rubel, just this week in the House, there was an unexpected vote that killed an agency bill that you were sponsoring. Were you surprised by that, and what happened there?
Well, I was a little bit surprised, but not completely stunned, because I had seen the night before that the bill had been given a -7 score by the Idaho Freedom Foundation.
And I should mention this was a bill about updating daycare licensing regulations.
Absolutely, right. So this was brought by the Department of Health and Welfare. They had really done their homework on this bill. They had notified every daycare provider in the state. They had gone to 8 different cities around the state, invited everybody to participate, had uniformly positive support on what they were proposing. And what they were proposing was really very sensible. Most of it was driven by a need to comply with federal rules that we have to comply with or we don't get the federal dollars. And those federal dollars add up to about $2.5 million over the next 2 years to support the Idaho childcare program. So as a baseline measure, of course, we would want to get those dollars to support Idaho families and to support our low-income folks who need daycare. And the proposals, like, as I said, a lot of it were to conform with federal requirements, and beyond that, it was just very basic child safety things, like, you know, if they're going to transport children somewhere, they need to be in a safety restraint. And if they're infants, they need to be placed on their back to sleep to reduce the risk of sudden infant death syndrome. They provided that the facilities had to be inspected every year instead of every 2 years, which was actually part of the federal requirement in order to qualify to receive these funds. There was nothing on there that was radical in any way, shape, or form, and it had overwhelming support from those who were to be regulated. So on the face of it, it was a bit stunning that it should be rejected. The only thing that could explain it, or that had me nervous about the bill, was that freedom score, because the Idaho Freedom Foundation can be a very powerful group in this building, and when they put a score on something like -7, which was the lowest score I think I've ever seen on any bill, I didn't even know the scale could go to -7. Then I thought, I'm carrying a bill with a -7 score. You know, whatever legislators are out there that are trying to guard their freedom score, I could run into trouble on this, especially in an election year.
So what do you think will happen next on that issue?
Well, it's hard to see, it's hard to imagine that we would really forego $2.5 million in federal funds, although it's not beyond the beyond the realm of the imaginable. But I suspect another bill will come back that will probably do the absolute bare minimum of what needs to be done to adhere to the federal guidelines in order to get that money, and that would be do fingerprinting and background checks. So I suspect they won't do some of the additional, albeit extremely advisable things, like saying that daycare providers have to put seatbelts on kids when they transport them and lay infants on their backs and that kind of thing. So I suspect some of those extra very common sense safety provisions will be jettisoned in order to scrape together the votes needed to get the money. But I am a little concerned about those other things, because I had heard previously that Idaho is, I think, 54th in the country for our daycare licensing sufficiency. We're even behind Guam and Puerto Rico. We're behind every state and a number of territories. So I think this would have been a great effort to kind of bring us more up with the pack in terms of the reasonableness of our daycare licensing standards, which hadn't been updated in a long time. So now I don't know if we're going to be able to get there. I think maybe the best we can do is at least do the base minimum requirement to qualify to get federal funds.